Welcome to another episode of Lead Me, where we help you take the next steps in leadership. As the world seems becoming increasingly polarized, finding leaders who can lead with vision, intellect, and unity seem few and far between. In today's episode of Lead Me, Pastor Eric and Zach will discuss and answer questions like, how can a leader build trust in a culture that lacks trust? What insight can be shared about leading in environments with diverse perspectives and agendas? And what advice can be given to leaders that are just starting out on their leadership journey?
Awesome. All right. So today we're going to be talking about another speaker that the GLS had last year. So his name is A.R. Bernard. So he, according to his profile, he's the founder, president, and senior pastor of the Christian Cultural Center. So it's a church out of New York. And I really liked the speaker. It was more so if you ever get to attend like one of the GLS events, they have like two different types of how they like talk to speakers. So they'll either have like a speaker come up and talk, and just present what they're wanting to say, right? What their topic and their speech. And the other portion is more like an interview. So it's kind of like this, where they have someone facilitate the interview and ask questions of the person or speaker. And A.R. Bernard's segment was actually an interview segment. So that was really nice. And the primary talk was about building bridges and creating those places of common ground where you could finally kind of use that as leverage, right, to get the conversation started.
Yeah, I thought that was, I didn't know that was kind of a sit-down interview. You do such a good job writing these notes. I really do appreciate it. Because I thought it was really interesting as far as him being from New York, being a pastor, and him looking into ways to build connections, like with city officials, to just building people in his culture, to have that mindset that how can we reach out, because a lot of times especially us churches, we tend to look inward. And we need to look out because there might be opportunities for ministry, right? So trying to find that common ground.
Right. Well, and really the big takeaway to kind of take away from this discussion and what I walked away with after his talk was this idea that we have such diversity, right? There's so much diversity in our environment, and how do we navigate that? There's a lot of vitriol. There's a lot of divisive issues that polarize us to either way, and I feel like we've kind of lost this ability to have the conversation and kind of separate ourselves from our views, right? It's like, well, if I don't agree with you, then we can't be friends or we can't talk to each other. And so that's where this really comes into play, that building bridges.
Yeah, trying to find that little bit of common ground, right? To try to find that area where, you can have a conversation with somebody and build off from there, right?
Right, absolutely. And so he started his segment off with this quote. And I thought it was really, really powerful, but it's something that Albert Einstein said, and so I'm going to read it verbatim so I don't mess it up, but the quote is, "You can't solve a problem at the same level that it was created. You have to rise above it to the next level." And the context behind that is that the very nature of problem solving forces you, so just engaging with the problem forces you to go to the next level just by engaging it. And I think that's powerful because in order to engage with a problem, you have to take responsibility, or you have to take ownership of that specific situation, that specific problem, and say, I'm going to deal with that little piece of, my little piece of the pie, but I'm going to take ownership of that, and I'm going to do whatever it takes to find common ground, to be a solution to the problem. So I thought that was interesting because we talk about higher quality problems, or like really being intentional with the grind in our past conversations. I felt like that really plugged in, or like really connected.
No, I totally agree. I think that anytime we engage problems, there's a chance and opportunity for us to grow, right? And it increases our potential because it puts us in situations where we're going to grow at a more rapid pace. I think a lot of times people are afraid of problems and try to run away from them, right? But when we look at issues, I think it's easy to kind of run away from the culture today. Instead of maybe we could be the answer to the culture. Maybe we could help the culture in some way instead of trying to pull back or run away from it.
Right. Well, and like, I don't know about you, but like for me personally, I feel like I tend to use to kind of use that as a crutch almost, It's like I'm not even going to touch that subject because I know it's divisive. So I kind of generally know where people like stand on a particular topic, and it's like I don't want to even go there, because I feel like it takes up a lot of energy. But like owning the problem, it's like, all right, how can like let's kind of delve into this and then use the leadership leadership skills that we've been learning, whether that's through Christ, ultimately, as you mentioned before, like prior to this podcast, Christ is the ultimate leader, right?
Yeah.
And so it's like, how can we use those, like the knowledge and the skills that he has given us as Christians to shed light into that?
If I could add to maybe a perspective that sometimes we Christians sometimes get confused. My words don't matter as sometimes my actions. And a lot of times we'll want to do the quick, I'll post a Facebook message or I'll post my opinion here so that everybody will know my opinion. Well, why doesn't your actions speak loud enough to those people? And the problem with social media at times, if you're not building real relationships with people, then they're just basing an opinion on you. They don't really know you.
Right.
If you get ingrained with them, if you get around people that are different than you a little bit, it gives you an opportunity for them to really see the real you, not just take a quote or opinion of you or a snapshot of who you are, but to really get ingrained in your life. And then you as well, if you open yourself up to other people, they can see. And that's really, to me, where Jesus talks about being the light and the salt of the earth. It's for us to be ingrained in the community and the culture in some way to let that be seen. Not that we change, but we change we change the culture through Christ.
Absolutely, it's Him through us, right? Yeah. So, and
it's really building those relationships, kind of like he talks about building the bridge. It's us building those relationships first. That is almost more important. We've even talked about today in staff, about how important trust and building the relationships are. With gaining people in the church to make them feel comfortable. Well, in the same way, if we can build people's trust in us to know that we care about them and we value them first and foremost before we even really speak about our beliefs or about what we think,
right?
Then they're going to be more receptive to what we think.
Right, absolutely. And like, why do you think building bridges is so important?
Well, one is kind of just that, analogy or that imagery that you see in a bridge itself. It's taking two areas that are separated and have this big gulf of a river or a valley or whatever you want to say. But, building that bridge, that valley doesn't have to be there, right? That river doesn't have to be the thing that stops you from having a connection with the other side. And I think that's, to me, that's kind of the analogy of that.
And I think it's a neat, a little bit of a sidetrack, but I like how Porterfield's logo is, has the bridge, it's creating that connection.
Yeah, exactly.
And I think that's the one thing that this church really does. So one of many things that this church does so well, like in this community, is like really effectively building those bridges between people.
Yeah, and we want to do that more. I think we're just touching the iceberg or tip of the iceberg, if you want to say, to make that become more. And I think naturally most people want to do that, but they feel there's just too much of a gap, right? But like you said, when you really look at the problem and start thinking about how you can maybe potentially solve it, that increases your capacity. And it's always goes back to building teams, right? And finding others that you can go with you, and that it's not just you alone.
Right. And I think that's really important because that's what A.R. Bernard also mentioned when he was posed the exact same question. And he really said that, it's really crucial to find those areas of common ground and to bridge kind of like the divides because, we are social beings. We are meant to live in community. And when we find ourselves being separated apart, we lose that connection. And also, we could only go so far alone, right?
Yeah.
As leaders, you could only go so far. Like if you don't have a team, you're not gonna get far down the road. You need like everyone's perspectives. You need the team to help build whatever that vision is that everyone has of the future.
I've thought about that today too. That am I more important than the team?
Mm-hmm.
The team is really more important than an individual, right? It's building a culture where is that focus to where it's not one person just making all the decisions.
Right.
I mean, a leader sometimes needs us to make the final call maybe on something. But if you can get a team around you to make those decisions, then there's more unity in that. There's more power in that. There's more, just positivity in that too.
Right.
To make everybody feel like they've been heard, they've been able to state their case, and then to make that decision together as a team too. Even if you disagree with the decision made, you still feel loyal and you feel like the team is receptive to what you have to bring to the table. You know what I mean? Like you can get behind it because you support the team. And so I think that, as I think about a bridge too, I think about having the different, pieces that you put together to make a bridge. I mean, like you go back to physics class trying to use the toothpicks and everything. But you need all these pieces in the right frame and the right way to build that bridge.
Right. You have to have the right elements, otherwise it falls apart.
And like you said, too, about finding an element, and being this a leadership podcast, leadership is a great avenue for us to use as a common ground because in my view, leadership is something that transfers to so many other applications. I mean, you need leadership in whatever you do. And so if we can grow as leaders, and that could be a common ground in your business or your organization, that they could get by or get their head around talking about leadership points and leadership growth. And again, if you're taking Christ with you in that, it doesn't mean you always have to or may always have the opportunity to share your faith, but they'll see the character of who you are, and they'll start wondering and asking questions about how you got there. And that leads the door for you to the opportunity for you to share about who Christ is, at that point.
That's phenomenal. I love that perspective. That's powerful. So A.R. Bernard kind of like he wraps this initial segment up by just stating something that I thought was really profound. But he said agreement is a place of power, and disagreement is this place of powerlessness. And it's interesting because as you see like groups of communities, and you could see like when they're in agreement, like so much stuff gets done. And then when there's disagreement or, you have this dissension, it's like people feel powerless, you know? And I think that it kind of harkens back to what, Jesus said as far as like a divided house cannot stand. So with that being said, he segues into this section of like, how do you, we know that building bridges is important, but how do we start? Like, how do we start building that bridge? Like what type of materials do we use, metaphorically speaking, but he starts off with attitude determines approach, and approach determines success or failure. And
I like that.
That was huge.
Can you just read it one more time? Because I think maybe I want people to hear that part.
Absolutely. So it says attitude determines approach, and approach determines success or failure. I think that's huge.
It is when you really break it down. That our, and we know that our attitude changes a lot of things. I mean, when you go in with a bad attitude, how it's going to, typically it's going to result in bad things. I mean, thankfully we see God work in people's lives like Jonah. That even if you have a bad attitude, God can work beyond that. But generally speaking, most of the time when we carry our bad attitude into a certain situation, it ends up bad, right? But if we had a positive approach, if we thought that, hey, it goes back to having that personal vision or a personal mission statement, and having a vision personally that kind of carries out to say, how am I going to live my day? How am I going to approach the world? If you have a positive outlook on that, it just carries over.
Right. Absolutely. And I mean, that's so powerful because, it's one of those things, it's a choice that we have. And it leads into, it snowballs, right? The bad attitude snowballs and a good attitude also snowballs. But sometimes I feel like a bad attitude snowballs a lot faster, Well, it quickly gets away from you.
And I've seen this in youth groups and stuff. One person with a bad attitude can just ruin the whole thing. It just affects. It's like an infection going through like somebody doesn't like a certain game and everybody complains about it, and then nobody's wanting to play the game or whatever you do. And I think that it can be happening in the work environment as well. You have one person that but having that positive attitude to look at it as an opportunity, to look at problems as opportunities, kind of like what we've been talking about, to see this as, I think as Christians, we're bringing the hope of the gospel to the world. And we should think of it as an opportunity, I have an opportunity, I have an audience, Pastor Adam doing the chaplaincy program, or when we have opportunities to serve in our communities. It's an opportunity to make a difference. And don't negate what, maybe you think in your eyes it's small or it's not significant. And you never know. You never know what that may potentially lead to something else.
Right. Yeah, it also goes back to like what Jesus says, right? Like be diligent for the small things.
Yeah.
Because
it opens the door for bigger things to happen.
It does.
And, if we're faithful with those little things, he's more gracious and willing to give us bigger things,
right.
But to me, it's always about the little things, right? It's always about those little things that we do behind the scenes. Yep. I'll never forget one teen in my ministry did something to help somebody else out. They didn't have a partner to play a game, and they were willing to sacrifice their friendships and hanging out with the people they wanted to make sure this other person had a partner. And that will always stick out in my mind because that was a little thing, but it made such a big impact.
And it was an action, right? It wasn't like, I'm going to go over and I'm going to befriend this person. He actually just took the action and that made a significant impact. So it's like, wow.
Of that, isn't it sometimes our thing would be just to go over and console the person, but we wouldn't be the teammate. You know what I mean? Like, I feel so bad for you that you don't have a partner, and then walk away, right? But like you're saying, the action was that they actually jumped in and got involved. And I think that's kind of if we had that approach, that attitude to say, I'm willing to serve, I'm willing to maybe let go of my pride and let go of my. I guess we're going to get there. I'm jumping ahead about talking about humility.
Perfect segue.
Yeah.
That's so strong too. And like before we kind of get into the section of humility, that reminds me of this this other speaker, and I think it was in one of his books. It was Erwin McManus, and in one of his books, he said the big pivotal moment in my life was when I realized. Here I was like praying for God to help me. And I realized, what if I'm the answer to someone else's prayer, And like being intentional about that and ask God for me to help answer someone's prayer, to be like a conduit for God. So I thought that's huge.
What if we all approached life like that?
Oh my gosh.
That I could be a blessing to somebody else.
Yeah.
How much of a difference we can make if we got the focus off us.
Yeah.
Because so many times we're focused on, well, what am I going to get? Where am I going to be? What position am I going to have? How's this going to look for me?
But we forget God has us, right?
So God should be taking care of me. So it leaves me open to take care of others.
Right.
And that's such a big priority for God. I don't, I'm actually working on a message this week, and that it goes back to this fundamental thing that God cares about His relationship with us, but he also cares about deeply, very much importantly, he cares about how we treat others. You know, he wants us to love our neighbor as ourselves. That's
Right.
it's not just some, you know, phrase or some quote that Jesus said. God truly wants that to happen.
Right.
You know what I mean?
Yeah. And I mean, that all takes, like humility on our
Yes,
end, right?
absolutely.
And that's where we were segueing into this next kind of like subsection of
Yeah.
this section. And we're talking about approach, right? Attitude determines approach. Well, what type of attitude is that? And the primary attitude that he focused on was humility.
Yeah.
So, like walking into a room, we hear the phrase, like fake it till you make it, and there's a lot of stuff that goes into that. But I love this perspective of like going to a room and just assuming that there's someone else who knows more, who's more knowledgeable, and like being okay with that, but having that conversation and approaching it that way and approaching it with a sense of humility. In his interview, he talked about going to a room and having someone like invite you to the table, right?
Exactly.
And I thought he's like, just be there, be present, talk, have the sense of humility, and people will gravitate towards that, and you'll find yourself being invited to these areas of common ground where you could talk and have that conversation.
Yeah, and Jesus teaches that to take the lower seat. Don't just assume that you're deserving of this higher place, but to come with that humility,
Right.
and you will be honored if you're asked to sit higher up, like you're saying. So I just think that, too many times we're all about ourselves, aren't we?
Right.
And humility is a way of building that bridge instantaneous, because we're not. I think oftentimes people probably feel like we're going to just share our agenda and that we don't really care about them,
Right.
when we need to care about them,
Right.
and we need to put them in a higher place. One of the scriptures that hit me a lot was when Jesus asked Simon, "Do you see this woman?" Because he knew that she was probably a prostitute. He knew that Jesus shouldn't be around her. All these things, all these conversations were happening in his home, but he didn't stop to look and really look at her
Right.
and see her as a person.
Well, that's empathy, right?
Yeah.
I mean, humility kind of takes empathy or requires empathy to kind of see what that person's.
And correct me if I'm wrong, but I think empathy and sympathy, sympathy is just feeling sorry for somebody,
Right.
where empathy is putting yourself in their shoes.
Oh, absolutely.
In their situation. So that's a great wording there, because that's what we really need is empathy. Not saying we just feel sorry for somebody, but just try to identify with what that person's dealing with. Try to look at what that person's going through and saying, I want to understand. I want to know what you're feeling.
Right.
And understanding that, gaining that knowledge of how they feel.
And it forces you into that kind of like perspective, like to see things, because I think as part of our experiences, we have such unique experiences based off of like where we've been, how we grew up, etc. And that kind of creates lenses for how we look at life, and like understanding, okay, so maybe this person has a different thought process, or they're looking at life like completely wrong, right? And we think it's wrong, but like once we identify like what lenses they're looking through, it helps us identify like maybe what their struggles are. Maybe they have a bad view, maybe like a really negative view of God, and maybe it was something that they experienced as a child. Like maybe like do they have like a bad relationship with like a church or something like that, and like having that relationship helps identify those lenses and helps empathize with what they're going through, and helps you to perhaps talk through that situation.
Yeah, and to add to what you're saying too, I think there's a lot of times where on the surface we think that there's very few things we might have in common with somebody, and maybe our stories are different. But once we hear those stories, then we recognize parts of their story kind of we can identify with or we can understand. And so, of course, the old saying, don't judge a book by its cover, but it's really true with people that you never know what somebody's been through. You never know what their life is like. And so that you can see these surface differences maybe that stand out. But deeper, there's maybe a connection that you can build, a bridge that can be built with them to involve them and just build that relationship with them to make a difference.
Right. And I mean, in order to do something like that, there's this term that he uses, but it's called moral courage. And I mean, it's such a strong term because, and I mean, he defines it by saying the willingness to take moral decisions regardless of what those consequences may be.
Yeah.
And, like how many times have we found ourselves in those situations where there's like this clear choice, like, do I take road 1 or road 2? And so many times we think about the consequences, like, all right, if I do the right thing, like, is it
if you do the right thing, do the right thing, right?
Exactly.
And don't try to talk yourself out of it. But you're saying exactly what most of us do. We feel like, I want to weigh out all the consequences for this because I want to see if this is really right. But a lot of times we know the right thing to do. I mean, it's not a mystery to us. It's just and that's one of the things that I remember learning about how to coach people. It's kind of a way of counseling where you're not trying to. You don't need to tell people the answers; they already know the answer. You just need to pull out the answer that's inside of them already, because they know morally, or they know, what they're feeling. The decision should be made, but they've oftentimes talked themselves out of that decision or that choice.
And what's interesting, I read this in a book, but it talked about whenever sometimes you'll have someone ask you like, oh, I have this choice, and I feel like this may be the right thing to do, but do you think that that's the right choice? And like I made connection with that. And the answer was, we usually ask people that question. Like we like to ask another party, like whether this is the right decision or not, because we could always bounce off of their decision. So we have someone else making that decision for us, and then it kind of takes the responsibility off of us.
Very, very true. And a lot of times I think about this a lot, like with people like Steve Jobs and other people that have been real innovators in our world. People, sometimes we think, oh, I want to survey people. I want to get feedback. But how do people know what they want? Like they don't know what they want until they see something new or something, and then they can make that decision. So sometimes we want to get all this information from people and try to make what we think is, a more secure decision. But we need to have the moral courage to just make a decision, because some people don't even know what they want until they see it.
Right.
Like you maybe need to be the innovator to show them the way, and have that moral courage that he's talking about to make that choice, to say, no, we're going to go in this direction.
Right.
And that way, and that's what's interesting about leaders. Leaders aren't always good leaders. Aren't captive to fear, stopping them from making a good or a bad choice. They just know that there needs to be a choice. Sometimes we get caught up in whether it's the good choice or a wrong choice. It keeps us from making any choice.
Right.
You know what I mean? And that sometimes can hold us back as leaders.
Yeah. So like how you touched base on that moral courage, because like, why do we need that? And I think that that's a really good segue into the next section, and that's what should the mindset be going into a situation where you may have someone that's on the other side of the table, completely opposing views. So whether that's, like someone in your personal life or a leader that you're having a conversation with. And his main thing is, in order to have that conversation, you first have to build trust. It's all about that relationship. And because every relationship is really built on trust, and trust is built by, he said, consistency, integrity, reputation, and all that takes time. Yeah. And that kind of goes back to, like if you're approaching someone with a different viewpoint, but they know, like you've known them and they know that you have a reputation of being solid, being consistent, being honest, being true with people, they're going to take that perspective a lot more.
That even if their morals are different than mine,
Uh-huh.
that I'd still treat that person with respect and value them.
Absolutely.
When I disrespect them or judge them or prejudge them, I should say, that oftentimes cuts that relationship right off, right? Because
it validates their side of the view, because saying, "Oh, I knew there was a reason I didn't like that point of view, because look how they're treating me." You know?
Yeah, because hopefully people get to know us as even whether we're talking about our faith in Christ or whether we're talking about other just moral values that we may have that may be different. Just kind of helping people to see who we are hopefully speaks well of who we represent. Like our family, our faith, that they see the value of what we have to offer through us,
And so that segues, because really you have this idea of like establishing trust. Well, what if like you had no control over it, right? And now trust is no longer like really on the table. So how do you go about like rebuilding that trust? And it's interesting because he touched on something that you mentioned earlier, and that's like the more we dig and the more intentional we are with having those conversations, you find out that you're more alike than you think you are. You think you're like on either ends of the spectrum, and you find out that maybe it's like 90% that you have in commonality, whether that's like a similar upbringing or you like the same things like baseball or football. You find out that we're really not that different, but we just have this like difference in opinion.
Yeah, when I was it's probably been 10 to 15 years now, but I realized that kind of like a little formula that I tried to create was always getting to know a person's name, knowing their name, and then knowing like 2 to 3 facts about them. Maybe a favorite sports team, just to create dialogue, just to create conversation, because you need some starters, especially when you're first getting started to get to know somebody.
Right.
If you can find a few of those things that you can like point to. Whether it's video games, music, movies, whatever it may be, but just trying to know a few facts that could cause you to have a start of a conversation with somebody. It just opens the door to other things being there for the future. So start trying to pick up on some details about each person that kind of help you build that dialogue, to have those conversations.
Yeah, and that's definitely really, really important. And I think that kind of cues on this like next point. So A.R. Bernard talked about this, and he said that to really be aware of whose voice is really speaking. And he said there's like, especially in our current culture, he said that the voice of the people, and I'm air quoting people, is hijacked by so many different entities and organizations who are wanting to push forth like an agenda, right? And so like you have news media outlets, you have special interest groups, and they're hijacking the voices of the people, and just realizing that just because it's out there doesn't necessarily mean that that's what's actually going on. And he said that plays a key role in really the polarization of our society and our cultures, because we're like, that's what's going on out there. But he said it's interesting because we have like this tendency to see Washington as like super divided. He said you go to like the communities and you find out that they're more willing to work with each other. And so it's just realizing that getting together is a lot easier than we think it is.
Yeah, unfortunately, I think that like media has pumped that both out on both sides of whatever argument you may have in the political parties. That media kind of intensifies that and makes it seem so polarizing when, like he's saying or you're saying, that when you break it down, it's not like that in the real world. It's just been amplified by media trying to make it so that it'll grab people's attention, because they're really, and that's important for us to understand, is that sometimes some of these organizations are just trying to feed the frenzy, you know what I mean? And that's not always the real case of what's
Right.
happening in the real world. For people.
Absolutely. That's awesome. And he kind of rebuilds this, and I don't know. I feel like I have a hard time with this, but it's a powerful saying that he kind of ended this section with. But he said, realize that you are not going to convince everyone.
Yeah.
You just have to convince enough of the right people if you're going to affect change. I think that's so powerful because, especially if your personality is to be like a people pleaser, right? You want to please everyone, but realizing that no matter what you do, you're not going to be able to please everyone. And so it's which individuals can we convince to affect change in our communities and in our societies?
I think it's important to realize Jesus didn't convince everybody
Yeah,
either. Right?
exactly.
So
He convinced 12, right?
Yeah,
At least.
yeah. If people are going to hate Jesus, and he says that to us, if they're going to be people that hate me, what do you think they're going to do to you?
Exactly.
And I think that's kind of not that we want that to happen. We do want to try to be peacemakers, but there are going to be people that despise what we do and what we're about, and that's okay. But we can make it a difference in one, right? We can make a difference in few. That can make a huge impact on others.
Absolutely.
Because that's the other thing too. Even if I just say my whole life I made an investment and I made a difference in one person, who's to say that person doesn't go out and change 2 lives?
Right. Absolutely.
And that person after them changes 3.
Yeah.
I mean, think of like we're living beyond Paul's writings, right? So we're at over 2,000 years, or well, not quite, but close. We're getting close to about 2,000 years since Paul started writing. And think about that, 2,000 years of difference made by a letter written by somebody in jail.
Mm-hmm. Right.
It's just awesome.
Yeah.
And if I could have that kind of impact on one person, and that would change other people's lives and their trajectories, then who knows what God may do, with that.
Absolutely. Yeah. And I mean, I think that's where is putting trust in God and faith that, and just taking comfort that we're not going to know the entire picture and being comfortable with that. Yeah. And that's hard, because you want to know, all right, I do this, like what are the immediate results? And sometimes it takes a while we may not even know what the results are going to be, but we can take comfort that we did the right thing. We took the right choices through God's help, and
that's
leave
why
the rest to God.
That's why it's always important to cherish the small things. I think God can oftentimes give you a big vision, and to live, like we talk about solving higher quality problems, but doing the little things can lead you to those bigger things.
Right.
I mean, like make sure you take care of those little things because you never know where they may lead you.
Right. And I think you really touched on a good point a few minutes back, and that really provides like this really good, a really good transition into this next part, which is called tension and conflict. But you mentioned how, with Jesus saying, "Hey, if this is how they are treating me, like, don't be surprised when people treat you the exact same way." And A.R. Bernard touched on that, and he said, those of us who believe and participate in the kingdom of God are automatically put into this place of tension because our Christian views are automatically like opposed to that of what the world cherishes. And so it's like, all right, you become a Christian and it's easy. Like, no, it's a marathon now because, it's trying to abide in God's word and trying to run the race to the end. And so I thought that was really, because it's like we try to run away from problems. We try to run away from tension. But by being a Christian, you're already put into tension. Exactly. So just realizing that.
And embracing it in some ways because, there's so many stories. I mean, think about if, would a child ever walk?
Mm-hmm. Right.
Would if there was no resistance, would you ever see a team succeed in sports and be a Cinderella story? So the tension, can produce growth in all of us.
Right.
if it's applied right and we have the right attitude going into it,
Right.
So, embracing the tension and understanding that that's it's really a part of life. It's part of our spiritual growth too.
Well, and like that tension as well, it kind of leads into some of, like what are some of the more like difficult bridges that we could encounter. And in his interview, Bernard talked about some of like the most difficult bridges that he sees for himself. And one of the most difficult situations is trying to mend or create a bridge between himself and someone who sees Christianity or has been hurt by Christianity or sees it as a detriment to the world. And like it did them wrong. And he said he always goes back to because he was a former Muslim, but he said, the one thing to remember is Christianity didn't save me. He said it's a relationship between myself and Jesus that saved me. And he said that's the thing to kind of keep in mind. He said we're not trying to pander religion to someone. We're trying to get them to come to a relationship with Jesus. Yeah. I thought that was
it's interesting because Jesus, we're not the ones that make Jesus exclusive. Jesus said that himself by saying, "I'm the way, the truth, and the life."
Right.
No one comes to the Father except by me. So, we need to understand it's not, we don't have to be the ones treating it as exclusive. The gospel, and that's another thing, the gospel is going to be offensive enough. How can we make everything else less offensive that we're not offensive?
Right.
Because the offense is going to be that whether they take Jesus' word as truth or not. And that's not about you. That's about them and Jesus. So how can I approach them with humility, love, grace, to build a bridge to where I can build a connection with them that they can make a choice or a decision about what to do with Jesus.
Right.
Because that's the ultimate decision everybody will have to make.
Right. That's a big, powerful, pivotal decision. So he really ends, as we kind of like wrap this up, he ends with a section as like advice to leaders. Like what are some of the advice, what is some advice that he could give emerging or new leaders or, current leaders? We're always learning. And the first one is managing continuity and change. So just realizing that, there's going to be a continuity and you have to recognize what to continue and what to change. And he adds more to that. And he said that knowing what to change and what to continue is the challenge. Because if you change what you should continue, you lose your identity.
Yeah.
And if you continue what you should change, you'll become irrelevant. And
I like that. That's
that's
really
powerful.
Yeah.
You'll
become irrelevant. Yeah.
Yeah. And it really boils down to like, what are the basics? Like what are your values? What do you espouse in your life that will weather the storm,
That's something that we've been talking about, and I've been thinking a lot because I'm transitioning from the leadership position I'm in now, transitioning to this new leadership role. And so what are the things here that are going to stay the same? And are they clearly defined? Do they set people at ease? Because we don't want to change too much of the culture or what's happening here. But at the same time, there are things that maybe could change to help us reinforce the culture that we want to build or reinforce the continuity that we have. So how can you do things to where you're causing some changes to help growth and help movement, but not lose our identity and our culture and what we've set forth so far? We want to keep that going forward and keep that moving. So, just like the mission statement we have, that's why, for me, it was kind of one of those things I was glad I was able to see that as a building block for what we want to do, because I see it as a continuation. It's not something I feel like we need to change our mission statement. Actually, it was more like let's simplify it. Let's take the mission statement, but could we, pick out the three most important words out of it so that we're building on instead of taking away. It's actually just highlighting these three things.
You're clarifying it, you're giving it more impact.
Yeah. And that doesn't mean that we have to do away with that. That still can be side by side there. But we're just trying to make it more evident what we're about and just make it clear, for everyone what we're really about.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, so that was A.R. Bernard's talk about building bridges, and hopefully, it's something that is of help. I found it extremely helpful.
Oh, I think it was
and
really good. I enjoyed the conversation today.
yes, it was very enjoyable conversation as always, and once.
Thank you so much for joining us today, and we hope that this has helped you to take the next step in your leadership. Be sure to join us next time on Lead Me. Take care.